welcome once again to another edition of BTL Day 4 with the man, Frank Scalish, along with the man that usually sits to my right, Mr. Matt Pangrat, live from Tulsa. And it is Day 4. Frank, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well.
Very nice.
I'm tired today.
You look tired.
Yeah,
you need to perk up, man.
I've been fishing every day, and I'm not 20 anymore.
No, neither am I. All right, folks, got to get started right off the bat. Matthew, great job on the video. Already a lot of views. Great job on the water. And a lot of people, Frank, I spoke to you after my demolition day is what I call it, where I only caught 2 fish. Well, I caught 6, but 4 were in the slide. Anyway, got totally destroyed, committed 100% to throwing a topwater for about an hour and a half.
When we're talking about a one-on-one match, we got to clear that up. It's on the YouTube channels that I posted yesterday. We got to put everybody up to date. You can't just go off willy-nilly talk about something.
No, I like how you set things up. I'm emotionally tied to this subject matter. Yeah. All right. So anyway, basically, folks, I got my butt totally handed to me, and I made a commitment. And see, I learned a lot yesterday. Frank, I always say that when you get destroyed, you can still learn a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
And I learned a lot yesterday, but I fished history. Hadn't been on the lake in 10 years this time of the year or more. It might even have been longer. And I made a commitment to fish historical places that I caught them when the conditions were like the way that they were yesterday. I fished out. I threw a big crankbait. I threw a Carolina rig. And then I tried to get a topwater bite in the morning. It just didn't happen, man. And people want to know where I went wrong.
Well, I don't know. I cannot answer that question. I wasn't on the water with you.
I know, but I'll say this. All right, this shows a lot of value in what anglers do. It doesn't matter if it's a weekend tournament or a Elite Series or BPT or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. The time that you spend on the water prior to the event, going through the process of eliminating water,
critical,
is so valuable.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if I would have practiced and I would have broke down the areas that I was trying to target and I didn't get bit, I would have moved on. And then I would have tried to do something else, or I would have tried to target different areries. But obviously with no practice, I'm just fishing off history. I had very little time.
Practice?
Dude, listen. All right, listen. You told me up front afterwards you had 4 brush piles. You are the dink master. When it comes to dunking and dinking around with your little spinning rod and reel, there's not too many people that are better than you in doing that.
Well,
seriously.
But that's a valid technique.
It is.
I mean, you're kind of downplaying it, I feel like.
I'm not. Dude, I just gave you props. How can I downplay that?
They even made a term. It's a backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
It is not. Dink master. Did he not, Frank?
I think it was backhanded.
You called me the dink master.
Look, there's no way on God's green earth that you're going to get me out there dinking and dunking around with a Ned rig or a wacky rig or whatever.
You said, man, we need to have a day where you take me out and I teach you how
That's
to do
right,
this
because
stuff.
I don't know how to do it. I've never done it, dude.
Yeah.
Never.
It's a lot easier than you think.
And that's smart, dude. If you struggle, anybody listening, if you're struggling on a technique, you need to go out, of course, when that technique is applicable, and fish it, because that's the only way you're going to get good at every part of your fishing arsenal.
100%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But he's right. Let me offer this before we get to it. Frank, you've done back-to-back Carolina rig shows. You've done multiple topwater shows. Mm-hmm. Here's the only thing I request. I request a Finesse show one Thursday.
I'm actually doing one. I'm actually doing one. I'm actually doing a video too.
Okay.
It's Finesse fishing is to catch the big ones. It's an art. Okay, it really is an art. Oh. And I can't even argue the fact about it, because I do it when it's necessary to do it. I've caught a lot of giant smallmouths on Champlain on a flick shake rig. A lot of giants. There's times when it's the money bait. You can't help it.
Yeah, I agree. I am not taking, and I don't want anybody out there to think I'm taking anything away from the guys that use the spinning rod and reel.
You called me the dick master. Frank's over there. I believe he just called me an artist.
Well, you know what? One man's trash is another man's treasure.
All right, look, Picasso. All right. Look, Picasso. I'm telling you right now, I gave it up to you yesterday. I'm giving it up to you again today. That is just not my style. And the fact that I only had history to go upon, and I didn't even have a spinning rod and reel in the boat, dude, I went with what I thought I could catch him, and I didn't catch him. Now, I could go out there today, and I could catch 20 pounds doing what I did.
Oh, 100%. And I knew that I was in trouble. I knew that what I had, that I needed 5 overs because I knew you were 2 or 3 bites away. All you needed was one good blow up on the traffic cone, and then 2 on the Carolina rig.
Yeah, it was obvious. It was obvious that all the bass were merging right for a construction zone with me throwing that orange spook. I didn't throw it that long. I really did.
It was so orange. If you guys haven't seen the video, it's on the BTL YouTube channel. It's the 2021 season, me versus Mark. We roll up to the ramp. You got to look at this because you can see it on his front deck. He has 4 rods on the front deck. Do you know this, Frank? Because you haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen the video.
He sleeps at the ramp because he wants to make sure he's there at first light so he can get the topwater bite. So here I am going 80 through the hills trying to get there by 5:20 in the morning so he doesn't call foul and say that the match doesn't count anymore because I showed up late. So we get there. And I look over, and he's got all I see is crane swivels and spooks. Every single one of them. It was like he went back and took notes from the Zara Spook Show. He's got a crane swivel. And then there's one. I mean, it looks like the sunrise peeking over the horizon. What is that? And he goes, dude, this is for catfish. And he shows me it back.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, dude, it's traffic cone orange.
Yeah, then the bass apparently said, hey, this contour line is closed.
Yeah, they're merging right. They just kept merging right.
What do you have, the super spook?
I had the super spook.
The regular spook.
The black metal chartreuse chrome.
Oh, yeah.
Had that tied on.
And then a vixen.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
and obviously it produced absolutely nothing.
Well, sometimes that they just don't want to topwater. But here, look, the other thing too, you had to go by what you know, and that's history. Okay, when you know how everybody says they got the local lake jinx on them when they fish tournaments, that happens when you fish history without establishing a pattern. That local lake knowledge is insanely helpful if you're on a pattern, because then you could recall 100 places just like that because of the history you have on the lake. And that's when the history becomes your buddy. But being that you haven't been on the lake in so many years, you had to take a chance on the history because that's what you knew.
Yeah. And listen, Matt, I'm giving it up to you. I did yesterday.
I'm doing a hard time, guys.
I know, but listen, it takes a very talented person to be able to finesse fish the way that you do. And it's kind of your niche. It is your niche.
Very talented. I mean, there's a difference between what I'm doing and what like Cody Meyer and Brett Naylor are doing, because they're very talented at it.
Look,
it's my confidence zone.
That
Just like you have a confidence zone, I have a confidence zone.
Exactly.
And some days yours is going to play better, and some days mine is going to play better.
So, as a result of this, Frank, there has been some discussion by the fans that the next time, just to switch things up, obviously we're still going to have our one-on-one next year, Matthew. They want to see a team tournament.
A team tournament.
Yeah, they want
Frank Jr.
They want. Here's what they want. They want you and Brad Hallman against me, and who do you think?
Matt.
No.
Oh, you and me against Matt and Brad.
They want to see that, all right, but logistically that's hard to do. There's another match that they want to see, It would be Matt and Brad Hallman against me, and who do you think, Matt?
Sean Goodwin?
No, you're close. You're in the ballpark.
I have no idea. Ed Barton?
Ed Barton.
Ooh, that's a...
Give it up.
Are you up to the challenge?
Well, I wanted to do me and Frank Jr. versus you and
Senior.
Frank.
We can do that. If logistically, we could do it. How about this? All right, this is about halfway in between.
It
Frank?
would be like a grumpy old man match.
Yeah, how about this? No. Frank, listen to this. How about this? In the fall, I'm talking November, December, all right, there's not a better place to do this, and it's about halfway in between both of us, Lake of the Ozarks. Me and you against the two youngsters at Lake of the Ozarks.
Lake of the Ozarks or Table Rock?
No, Lake of the Ozarks.
Okay. I got a place to stay. You sure you want to
see where his priorities are, Frank?
Lake of the Ozarks?
I got a place to stay.
That's okay. You got to have a place to stay. That's half the battle. Is having
I got a place to stay. How about that, Frank?
Most of the time I don't.
That's half the battle, having
Frank,
a place to lay down.
All right, I will put in a couple of personal days in class, me and you against Matt and Junior
All right.
on Lake of the Ozarks.
You think he'd be down for that, wouldn't he?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Are you kidding me? He's totally down for that. He would do that in 10 seconds flat.
I mean, if I lose, I'll go 3 days without wearing AFCO.
No, you don't have to do that. We wouldn't put your body through that torture.
No, yeah, we don't want you to go into convulsions there at all. That can't happen. All right? So we've got two things that the fans want to see. Me and you, Frank, against Matt and Junior. Okay. All right? And then
where's the Barton one take place, though?
Grand Lake.
I mean, why don't we just get real dirty with it and do it on the river?
You really want a piece of that on the river?
If I got home and in my boat.
Seriously?
If I got home and in my boat.
You don't want any part of Barton on the river, dude.
Yeah,
I'm just telling you.
That's what I said. Why don't we just get really dirty with it?
Okay, done. I will call him today on the river. Done.
Hey, just for your information, I've never been on Lake of the Ozarks fishing.
Dude, it is all identical. It doesn't matter where you put your boat in. It's shoreline rimmed with docks.
We'll have a day of practice, Frank. Okay?
Yeah, 1 day of practice. That's all I want.
That's
it's
all
either
we need.
Be we got to figure out where we're going to take out of. Are we taking out a PB2?
Probably.
Okay, we're good then.
Yeah.
It's all Greek to me.
It's all good, Frank.
Dude,
we will get that booked.
It's a whopper plopper and a buzz bait and a
See,
I hear they eat orange.
You're putting preconceived ideas in my head, Matt. That's not good for me.
I will say this. 2 Octobers ago, I fished a Toyota series out there. I was the only angler in the 140 boat field that zeroed.
You know what? That's impressive. That is an impressive stat.
You know what I did all day? I threw a spook.
Oh, come on.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, I did. I threw a spook.
No, you dink and dunked around.
No, not in that one. I threw a black spook and a black whopper plopper, and this 80-year-old guy behind me had the day of his life. He had 3 for like 14.
And what did he catch him on?
Black spook and whopper plopper.
All right.
Well, there you have it. All right, so those two matches are going to get booked. All right, done. But let's wrap this up, Frank. Sometimes situations like what happened to me, no practice, no defining what the pattern is, just going based upon history, sometimes that's going to happen.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, look, dude, I've gone out on lakes and pre-fished for 2 days and not caught anything, and then on the third day put it all together and had some of the best tournaments of my life. I mean, once the bell goes off, it goes off, you know. Yeah. I mean, it's just that's how it goes.
Hey, great day, though. Great job on the video, Matt.
I had a great time, dude. The fact that you were able to last 10 hours out there, there's some serious moments in it. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, Mark actually drove past the gym, Frank, where he had his accident, had to get airlifted out of a couple months ago. And honestly, I thought it would be a year plus before you were fishing by yourself
too.
for 10 hours in the summertime. And like, yeah, I called you a couple times during the day. We didn't talk about the fishing, but I just wanted to make sure you were good. And it was cool, man, to be able to do what you did after where you were.
Yeah.
It's pretty
absolutely
impressive, man. And I mean, like, no BS aside, yeah, I'm glad I kicked your butt and I tried to, and I wanted to pour it on after last year.
Yeah.
But just the fact that we were able to still do the one-on-one without you strapped to my back deck was pretty freaking cool.
It was.
That's good. And not only that, don't forget to mention the kind of drive to get there and to get home. So
3 hours.
It was a 20-hour day for you. You got up at what, 2:30, and he wanted to fish. I mean, it was cool, dude. So I mean, I would have gladly taken a butt kicking from you just for the experience.
Yeah, that's monumental, Mark. That's really good.
It is. And Clay, come on, dude. I'm not acting surprised that Matt kicked my butt. I spent one time on the water. The only place I've been going to is Lake X, also known as the aquarium. All right,
Sweet.
Catching fish. So, yeah, very, very nice just to be able to spend that much time on the water, and hopefully things will continue to progress. All right, moving on. A couple of housekeeping items, and then we're going to jump into what you're going to talk about today, Frank. Frank is going to make a special appearance on the Monday show. We're going to kick things off next week with Frank on the Monday show to talk a little bit about what he is going to be doing, a special, let's just say, engagement in a result of him doing day 4, and that's about all I'm going to say about it. So Frank will be on the show Monday to explain what he has going on for the future, and all I'm going to say, it is going to rock. If you want to become a better angler, you need to tune in on Monday to find out what Frank has going on. All right, so the remainder of the week, just check out the website. I believe either Tuesday or Wednesday, it depends on the weather, Matt and I are going to be doing an evening show. Because during the day, either Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on the weather and the weather forecast, we're going to be testing out some new stuff for some of the stuff that Matt has, and we've got to do this filming, and we're going to do it during the day, and then we're going to come back and do a show that night.
Dialed in, as you can tell, Frank.
We don't have it dialed in. We're just kind of going off the cuff, trying to figure out.
Boat, it'll be a fun trip. So
yeah. Good. So we got that going on. Whatever day we do it on, then we'll have a PM show. And then I mentioned yesterday that we were going to have the date to announce for the marathon show, the 24-hour show. It looks like right now, I'd say it's about 95% based upon schedules and what the other tournament trails have going on. It looks like we're going to do the marathon show beginning at 9 a.m. on August 9th. Until 9 a.m. on August 10th. That's a Monday and a Tuesday. Obviously, Frank will take part in that somehow, some way.
Oh, I got roped into doing a 24-hour show.
No, just making an appearance, dude. So August 9th and 10th, that will be the 24-hour show. First time in history that a live bass fishing studio show will take place for 24 consecutive hours.
So what are you doing?
Do what?
So what are you going to do? Go, hey, Frank, you got the 2 to 4 a.m. slot?
No, dude, I'm not going to do you wrong like that. No, you'll have
enough nefarious characters in this industry that are awake late at night that we can fill the spots.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of summarizing what we got going on over the next few weeks. And then we will do a Black Rifle Coffee on-location show once again. And then finally, my last announcement, and then we're going to jump into what Frank has to talk about. Dude, yesterday we surpassed the 10,000 subscriber mark on YouTube. Thank you so much, fans, for doing that. We only been doing the YouTube thing for not that long, and to get 10,000 subscribers, primarily on videos that we're doing in the studio with the show, is outstanding, and cannot thank the fans enough for reaching that landmark of 10,000 subscribers. And we'll keep it going and see what's going on. All right, Frank, you ready?
Ready when you are.
All right, this next segment is brought to you by Tide. No, it's not really. We're going to talk about Tides, okay? That's the pods. And make sure if you use Tide pods, they're not candy.
Don't
It's like
eat them.
3 years old, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's still going on.
It's an old joke, man. Come on. You got to, old jokes die hard.
It was the only thing at Tide that I had, Matt. I mean, we still use the pods. We don't use the powder anymore.
I wish we'd had this show before the James River, but hey, I'll take it now. When I fish a tidal fishery in it's 6 years.
Well, let's go.
let's dive in, Frank.
Yeah. First off, before I get into actually fishing in a tidal river, there's a few things about tides that I didn't know when I first started fishing tidal waters, and it caught me a little bit by surprise. But you have the tidal movements. There's usually 2 a day, approximately every 6 or so hours. You have a high tide, a low tide, and then another high tide and a low tide throughout the 24-hour clock. In the beginning of the tidal movement, whether it's a high tide or a low tide, there's very little water going through the system. It's very slow going for the first 2 hours. There's water movement, but it's super slow. The craziest thing is that the middle 2 hours has the most volume of water running through the tidal system, so that the middle 2 hours, once the tide, like if it says high tide is going to be at 12, then you know that in 2 hours, so at 2 o'clock, that's when the water is going to be shooting through the system, because that's when the most water moves. Okay, that's important to know, because that's the feed bag. That's when everything is going ballistic. High tide, falling tide is the best tide to fish. Rising tide is second best. Any of the ebb tides is a little bit tricky because the bass are accustomed to feeding on the movement of the tides. So that's the next thing I want to talk about is wind direction, because wind direction changes things. So let's say, and this happened to me in a Bassmaster event. The one morning of the tournament, I was in second place. This was on the Chesapeake Bay, and I had the tides planned out perfectly, and I was catching a lot of nice fish, and actually had pretty much set myself up to win the event. And on the final day of the tournament, the tide was going out and the wind was blowing with the tide. So the tide was blowing out, wind was blowing out. What happened to me was it made the tide go like that. And by the time I got up the river to where I was catching them, the tide was already gone. I wound up catching, the first fish I caught was a 5.5 pounder. And then I had to get out of there because I needed the tide movement. So I had to run back towards the Chesapeake to catch up to the tide. Well, I was fishing up the Susquehanna, and I was fishing in the real treacherous area up there. And I had my track lines laid out and my runs laid out where I could run in between these boulders at low tide. Unfortunately, with the wind direction, it pushed more water out of the system than normal. And when I came across a flat, there wasn't enough water on it to get over, and I tore my lower unit off the boat.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So the wind, you got to pay attention to the wind. Now, conversely, if the wind was blowing against the tide, so if the tide's moving out and the wind's blowing in, it slows the tide down and holds the water up for a while. So you have to know these things when you're fishing tidal waters. Wind is critical on a tidal situation. And of course, the second 2 hours of that tidal movement, where that's where the most volume's going through the system. So you gotta keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind, if you're running up a creek arm in a tidal area, the farther up the creek arm you go, by the time you start experiencing water movement, the main body is already, the tide is already going by you. So if you're going to run up a creek and you're going to wait till you feel the water move to go run the rest of your main river stuff, you already missed it. By the time you feel that water moving, you've already missed it. It's already done on the main body. So those are things that are critical. In that tournament on the Chesapeake, I wound up taking third place, but I only got to fish one place, the first stop I made in the morning. And I still wound up finishing third and only by, I think, less than 2 pounds to win it. And I only weighed in one fish. So,
wow.
So I made a bad judgment call. You know what I mean? I didn't take into account the wind. And so it's very important to do that. I was on the James River, and this is how I know about going farther up the creek arms. I was on the James River, and I had a section of this small creek arm that I went way, way up it. So it necked down and turned into a marsh, basically. And on the falling tide, I got onto a hellacious buzzbait bite because those fish that were up into the grasses in the marsh, as the tide falls, those fish start to pull down to where the deeper water is because no bass is going to get caught with no water. So they start to move down, and they were bringing all these bass to me, and it was like manna from heaven. But what happened was we had I got a lot of little nomenclatures, man. So what happened was we had a torrential downpour the night before. I think it had rained like 2.5 inches. When I got up that creek arm, it was pure filth mud, just pure mud. And I couldn't make it happen. And I thought if I waited till the tide got a little bit lower, that I could fish the transitional breaks and catch them on square bills and slow rolling spinnerbaits and stuff. So I hung in there a tiny bit longer than I should have. One of my main patterns was fishing the duck blinds on the main river. Well, by the time I got out of that creek arm, the main river tide had already gone out. I couldn't even get within 30 yards of these duck blinds. And I shot myself in the foot. It was one of the worst tournaments I ever had in my life. And that was my misunderstanding of exactly how the tide works. So you got to pay attention to that stuff. Now, as far as fishing in a tidal system goes, everybody knows the outgoing tide is the best tide to fish. That's just the nature of the animal. And the rising tide being second best, that's because both tides have water movement in them. So that's pretty much it. On the Potomac, what I looked for when I fish on the tidal rivers is I look for an area that gives me good water movement, but is close to an eddy area. So like a long finger that would come out, because the bass could take refuge on either side of the finger and they can feed up on top of the high spot. That's kind of what I look for in tidal situations. Blowdowns are another good thing just because they break current, give ambush areas and stuff like that. The cool thing about a tidal system is you almost never have to fish deeper than 7 or 8 feet. I've never encountered it, except for in the wintertime, which I'll talk about in a minute, except for in the wintertime. Now, here's another interesting fact for guys that travel a lot, run tournaments that go a bunch of different places. The farther north you go, the greater the tide. In other words, you'll lose more water. Like the Hudson River, when we were up in the Catskills, the Hudson River actually fluctuated like 5 or 6 feet. That was the tide. Yeah. And so if you were in a backwater area and the tide started moving,
you got to get out.
You got to get out, or you're going to have to wait till the incoming tide to get out. I mean, that's just the way it is. But, as far as, tidal fishing goes, if you just break it down into certain parts, when the most water mass moves through the system, incoming, outgoing, and look for areas that can hold the fish on the lowest of tides, you're going to be in good shape. You're going to find fish because the fish aren't everywhere in a tidal situation. They're just not. They have to have something to survive. So that's awesome. Pretty much it.
That's what I did in the Chickahominy on the James, not even intentionally doing that. But everything that you just described, I had all those elements. I had a deal on low tide where the fish could slide out and be comfortable. I had it where they were in less than 7 foot when the tide came up. And I was fishing current breaks where they were biting when the current was the swiftest, tucked up in shallow water that on low tide was dry, but they were behind the current breaks. Yeah, and I had all those things, and I drove around. And here's the thing I ran into, Frank, was, I practiced 4 days out there. But it's really hard to practice for 4 days because in all that time, you really only get about 12 hours of good fishing time in those 4 days.
Right, in 4 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100% correct. That's 100% correct. Because the tide, there's 2 tidal movements every day. So you have 2 high tides, 2 low tides. So that's what you got every day. And usually they're, 6 to 8 hours apart.
It's pretty gold, man.
Great stuff. All right, Frank, for the person like myself who's in preschool when it comes to tidal fishing, all right, how do people and what is the best way to find out about the tide schedule?
Well, here's the cool thing. Well, first of all, there's tidal charts. Okay, you can get tidal charts. You could go on Google and get tidal movements for certain areas. Like when I'm on big systems like Potomac or the Chesapeake or the James, I get, I look at the areas that I'm fishing and I get the tides I get either high tide or low tide at each section dotted down the river. So I could guesstimate in between where the tide's going to be. And whatever I do, I want to be at my absolute best spot no later than an hour after the tide starts moving, because I want to be there when the current starts ripping. That's when the fish really go animal. So that's kind of what I do. But I saw something the other day. I think Lowrance has it now on some of their units that will have a tidal chart on the unit. You can go into it and it'll tell you where the tide's at wherever you are. It gives you the bell curve for high and low.
It's really cool. Tells you what time you are with a line at it, and then you can look. Now, mine was just a little off when I was at the James, but it was so helpful. It put it oh, here it is. And then you could see where it's going to be in 10, 20, 30 minutes.
It's sweet. Cool. It's really
there you
cool.
have it. Colby said it right there, built into the Lowrance units. It's really cool. So,
yeah, which is really fascinating. I mean, I would have loved to have that technology when I was first starting out in these tidal rivers. It would have saved me a lot of, lower units and lost opportunity.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. All right, now you mentioned it earlier. What about the seasons when it comes to tides? You mentioned winter.
Yeah, winter's really the coolest thing ever in a tidal situation. The first time I experienced this was actually on the Hudson River, up near the Catskills. Like a lot of northern rivers that have heavy current, a lot of the fish will seek refuge out of the main current during the winter. Well, this happens on a lot of these tidal waters that experience cold temperatures. So what happens is they'll gravitate towards these deep creek mouths, and I call them creek mouths, but really what they are is little rivers that feed in, and they'll gravitate towards these deep creek mouths, and they all winter in the mouths of these creeks. And we're talking hundreds of them. We're not talking like a handful of bass. I mean, this is like you could literally sit there and not move your boat and just catch them all day long. They do the same thing on the main river, where they'll have, like, if you have an outcropping of boulders or something that comes out and there's a hole behind it, blocks a lot of the tidal movement and the natural river current, they gravitate and they go in there and winter over. So if you're lucky enough to find these winter holes on some of these tidal movements, October, November, and if you're not too far north, December can be some of the best fishing on earth. It's just amazing.
All right, let's talk about what's going on right now across the country in tidal waters. What would be the best way can you pattern fish? And I'm asking because, like I said, dude, I'm in preschool. All right. Do you pattern based upon the tide schedule? And if you do that or don't, what are you targeting? What is the best way to attack this situation during the summer?
Okay, so the first thing, always falling tide, I want to be on my best stuff at the falling tide. There's a lot of guys that they call running the tide, where they run down where the tide hits first, fish a spot, and they start running the tide up the river as they go to catch it. Okay, to make sure that every stop they make, they're at some stage of the falling tide. That's a tricky game. If you do one thing wrong and you flub up, you miss the tide the rest of the day. You miss your spot. So what I try to do is I try to be on my best stuff at the best time and milk it for everything it's worth. Once the tide goes out completely, you're going to have an ebb. You're going to have a low tide ebb. Okay. And that low tide ebb, you can still catch fish, but you got to really work for them. Then conversely, once the tide starts to come back in, your spots are going to get good again. Not as good as the falling tide, but they're going to get good again. That's one approach. The other approach is to run and follow the tide. I've never been super great at following the tide. And it's just because if you're not diligent about leaving when you have to leave, you miss it. And if you miss it, your whole day is over. So I try to stay in an area like Matt was saying earlier, where I got safe water at low tide, or I've got good stuff to fish as the tide comes up and good stuff to fish as the tide is falling. That's the way I play it. That doesn't mean it's the only way, because it's not the only way.
Okay, so what if you do get stuck in a low tide situation? What do the fish key on if everything that they were on is now out of the water? What do you do?
I fish the breaks. I fish all the stuff that's on a drop off. Everything that's on a break line. And here, remember, we're not talking about mega deep water, guys. We're barely talking 7-8 feet at the deepest point. I have never done good on tidal fishing deep, except for in the winter, because then they go into those deep pockets, and then you're just fishing almost traditional. You still have tide movement, which still affects everything. Yeah. But, depending on how far up north you are, you're only talking about, 2 feet to a foot at the most of tidal movement, unless you're up at the Hudson, and then you're talking about, a lot of water movement.
Yeah. All right. When the tide is up, obviously structure that's in the water, that's what you want to key on, right?
You move up with the tide, you move out with the tide. That's the best way I can tell you.
Okay.
And this is what I learned from fly fishing for redfish and snook. As the tide moves up, the fish move up. As the tide moves back, the fish move back. One of the coolest things about red fishing is that a lot of these marshy areas, they look like marshes, but there's drains that run through every one of them. The tide keeps the drains open and keeps the holes deep. Deep's relative, 4 to 5 feet, 6 feet. On every corner point where the tide washes over the point, you have oyster beds. The oysters love those points. So they get all these oyster beds. So as the tide's falling, you run and fish the oyster beds on the drains that come out into them. As the tide starts to increase, you're fishing the oyster beds again, but you're fishing for them shallow, like up against the pencil reeds and stuff like that. And that's kind of where I really started to understand tide. It wasn't, in my first days of bass fishing, I didn't understand tide, but when I was fly fishing down there, then I started to get it. And so then once I did that, now a tidal river is just another place to fish.
So we're in that same deal. So the fish are going out. So this time of year, late spawn to summertime. So here's where I ran into at the James River. And I didn't understand whether it worked or not. Okay, I got it. I had a set of docks. It was like 8 docks, and when it was lower tide, I would catch them, on day 2, I caught them out on the dock posts. But It was obvious there were cypress that were up in amongst the dock. Some of them were built around the dock. Some of them were but they were dry to 1.5 foot deep at low tide. At high tide, there was, 3.5, 4 foot of water on them. You could go through easy. So here was my deal. I kept going back and forth between this stretch, and I would catch fish. But in my mind, I'm going, okay, on a tide cycle, right? So if I got there on the outgoing tide, I fished the low tide, and then I got the first couple hours of incoming tide before I had to run. Are the same fish that were there, that were using that cypress that I was catching, the tide comes out, those fish pull out, there's not enough water. Is that their cypress? Like, are the exact same fish that were there on one tide cycle coming back when the tide's higher, or are those fresh fish cycling in? Like, if I catch one on outgoing tide, well, is it like, okay, that's, you know what I'm saying? Like a brush pile on Grand, like that's that fish's pile on Grand behind the dock, and it's a couple days before another one moves in. Or with the tide, are new fish constantly cycling into the same cover on every tide cycle?
Yeah, there is fish that cycle. There always is fish that cycle. How fast they cycle is to be determined. I mean, could be based on a lot of things. If you're talking about, post-spawn scenario, early summer, there's a lot of fish up there because they were just spawning. So there's a lot of fish in the area. So you'll get more recycling then. As summer approaches and it becomes summertime, a lot of the fish never leave the estuaries. Some of the fish go to the main river. There's migratories and natives. That's natives stay, migratories leave and come back with the seasons. I like fishing the main river in the summer. I think there's more fishing opportunities on the main bodies in the summer.
All right, cool. Now, lure-wise, what are we talking here? Obviously, it depends on what river you're fishing, but in general...
Orange Super Spook.
No, they've already merged right, Frank.
I had to bring it back to full circle.
You guys are going to be pissed off when I catch a 6-pounder on that thing.
I can just see him down there going, is that a drunk goldfish?
Right, exactly. All these people, they always
wait. You guys, payback is going to be there, I'm telling you.
I know. Payback's a bass.
Yeah.
I got it. What was the question?
The lure, typically in general terms.
In general terms, basically, I'm fishing any application suitable for whatever depth I'm fishing. Could be square bills, chatterbaits, topwaters, flipping and pitching stuff. Could be anything. It just depends. Like, one time on the Potomac, I was throwing a chatterbait. I made my own, so there was no brand, and I colored the blade black with a Sharpie. Put a green pumpkin blue skirt on it. Put a green pumpkin blue creature trailer on it, and slow rolled it at the outgoing tide and mauled them. Conversely, that same event, I caught them good on a buzzbait too. So, it just depends. The fish will let you know what they want. I mean, they'll just let you know. And you got to remember this too. Tidal waters have a lot of crabs in them. And so if you don't have a lot of rainfall in the spring, that saltwater presence creeps its way farther and farther up the tidal system. Like at the Chesapeake, I was actually catching big blue crabs with a jig. And and that told me that saltwater presence is a lot farther up, which prompted me to scoot farther up the area I was fishing until I got into a situation where the bass can handle the brackish water more. The funniest thing was I pitched that jig out there and I'm working down this rock pile and I feel something weird and it starts moving away with me and I set up on them and I come back and I was using a woolly hog craw trailer from Yum, and I come back and all the pinchers are taken. And I'm like, what the hell? I re-rig another one. I pitch back up there, and it starts swimming away again. And I jig flies out of the water, and I got nothing. So I'm like, okay. So I rig another one. I throw back out there, and it starts moving, and I just start really slowly reeling it back in. And I got something on there. He's doing stuff. And I got him, and I'm reeling him in, and this crab's got my jig with his two pinchers. So I flip him in the boat, right? And it's a good size blue crab. He lands on the front deck. He lets go of my jig, and he's like, on guard, claws up in the air. I'm like a freak when it comes to animals. I have to explore. So I go to grab this thing, and he takes off across the deck of my boat, and I was stunned because I didn't know they were that fast. So he goes around the front deck of my boat, falls down into the deep spot of my boat, and he starts running underneath my console, and I'm like, oh man, I can't let him get behind there. He'll get behind everything and be in the bottom of my boat somewhere. So I get on top of him, and I go to grab him, and he gets me. And I'm like,
the worst pain in the world. The worst pain in the world. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, Frank.
So in the meantime, I finally get this animal, where I can actually look at it. And it was pretty cool. And I chucked him back. But oh man, I had so much fun. I was catching those things on purpose just to see how many I could get in the boat. It was a ball. I mean, it was a ball. And then I was going to take some home. I actually went as far as to buy a little mini crab pot, to throw out. So at the end of the tournament, I can go get it and take all my crabs home. And then I'm like, well, I can't do this. I got like an 11.5-hour road trip. I'm not going to deal with all these crabs. Forget it.
Dude, we did that on the St. John's River. I was rooming with Kelly Jordan in an Elite Series, and they had a crab trap, and I went and got chicken necks.
Oh, yeah.
And every day I get 4 or 5 of those things, and I had to buy like the permit and the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
Got the limit of it, and we had a blue crab boil at the end of it with the Old Bay seasoning and stuff. Oh, my gosh. It was one of the highlights. I got pictures of it, but one of those suckers got me because on the first day, like you did, I was like, oh, look, blue crab. And it freaking, it's like a vice grip.
Oh, yeah.
With razor blades, serrated razor blades. And I run inside and I've got this dang thing attached to my hand and I'm screaming like I just got my freaking leg chopped off.
They pinch.
And it keeps tightening. It's like they keep chewing on you with their claws. So I didn't realize if you just dip them in the water, they immediately let go. Like that's their defense thing.
Or put them on the ground.
So here's what I did. I just broke his claw off. Now I've got some zombie crab claw that keeps getting tighter and tighter and there's nothing attached to it. And I'm yelling to Dave, get the truck. We're going to the hospital. It got me like, it was the worst pain. Like it was probably one of top 3 pain I've ever felt was a blue crab that got the meat of my palm right there and would not let go.
Yeah, I had 2 crab incidents. I was on the Potomac and I was on a specific pattern, and it was an eelgrass pattern, and the eelgrass would come out and make these long points. And so in between these eelgrass things, there would be little ditches where the eelgrass didn't grow. So I, like an idiot, got up on my boat. I stood up, put it in gear. So I was idling and I was steering backwards, because of the way the sun was. I had to look the other way to see the eelgrass that came way out. And I was just steering with my hand backwards. All of a sudden I hear, and I'm like, what? I thought I ran aground. I got a cord from somebody's crab pot around my prop, and it reeled up the crab pot right into my lower unit. So I'm like, holy crap. And it was full of crabs, dude.
Oh, geez.
Like there were claws sticking out of this trap everywhere. So I go, I gotta find a sandbar to jump out in so I can undo this thing. So I raised my motor all the way up, put the trolling motor on high, and I started going towards a high spot. I get to the high spot, lift the trolling motor up, boat slides up on the high spot. I jump out. I got my pliers. I don't want to ruin the guy's trap, but I don't want it to get into my prop shaft. So the tide's moving, the boat's swinging around, so I get behind the lower unit, and I got one hand around my lower unit, and I got the pliers, and I'm trying to get this knotted mess out of my prop. All of a sudden, dude, right in the small of my back, and I'm like, I'm sitting out there going, oh, he's got me. And it wouldn't let me go. I did the same thing. I reached back there. I grabbed it. I broke his claw off, and the thing is still stuck on it's like got my meat, and it's just like in there. And so I get the pot off. I get all that thing undone, and I bring the pot. Whoa, I'm tangled. I bring the pot back to where the rest of the buoys were, and I lay it out there, and then I get my lock pliers and I crush the claw to get it out of my back. I was like, no, they don't. Like when you break them off,
you get tighter when you break it off. It's like a vice grip, and now it has no brain. It's just.
It's like, I was like, oh my God. But you know what? But that's not the worst pain. That is not by any stretch. I was fly fishing on the Intercoastal by Pine Island Sound, and I stepped on a stingray, and it got me right in the ankle where the barb went right up into my ankle. And I was like, that lit me up. I mean, I'm just telling you that. Like I saw a flash of white light, and I said, "Oh my God, what just happened to me?" You know what I mean? And I didn't understand. First, I thought it might have been a jellyfish, it might have been a man of war. I didn't know what was going on, and I was very, very far from where I was staying. So I said, "Well, let me get to the bank and see what's going on." So I walk out. I look, I got a hole in my wading shoe the size of a 9-penny nail, and this freaking thing this big sticking in there.
Oh, so it broke off in there?
Yeah, so I pulled it out. I pulled it out with pliers. I actually still have it. I pulled it out with pliers, and I was a little nervous because I didn't know much about it. And I said, well, by the time I walk back, it's going to be probably an hour because I waited way. So I said, well, I'm going to just keep fishing. And if I start to feel nauseous or dizzy or something, I'll get out of the water and go to something public, And so
I someone down.
Right. So I maintained, and I still fished. I caught the crap out of the specks and little pompano, and I was no worse for the wear except for the pain. The pain was unbearable. It was unbearable. And part of it was because it got me actually in the ankle. And you don't have a lot of meat there. So it went up and in, and it was weird, dude. It was really weird. It was my fault. I mean, I got over anxious because I was catching so many speckled trout that instead of shuffling and taking my time walking, I was trying to get to the next point of grass. And so I was taking big steps to get there, you know what I mean? And it was my fault. So, but that was the most pain that was the most pain that I've ever felt from an animal, was that.
Wow. Great story though. Great story.
Yeah, it's great. Hey, it's great. Genius/idiot.
That started with the bass key on Tidal rivers and ended up with
that's how he rolls, man.
Fly fishing and stingray barbs in the ocean.
That's how he rolls. That's how he rolls. All right, Frank, what do you think the biggest mistake people make when they're fishing tidal waters that they could correct based upon your guidance?
I think the biggest mistake is not understanding the tide. That's the biggest mistake. Everybody knows the tide goes up and down, but I don't think everybody knows it's after that, that it's during the second 2 hours when it is moving. That is when the most volume is either going out or coming in. The first hour and a half, 2 hours, it's slow. It's almost negligible. The water's starting to move. Things are starting to happen. That's your key to be where you need to be. When that water starts to move, you better be on your best spot because it's about to get right. The other mistake that I see people make is that when you find areas in a tidal situation where there's fish, there's a lot of fish there. It's not one fish. There's a lot, unless you're flipping isolated cover. Let me rephrase that. Because like blowdowns and duck blinds are only going to hold so many fish. But the grass is where the money's at. The grass is the money. There's way more fish in it.
Hey, Matt, Tell the fans out there, because your experience, I mean, we're in Oklahoma with tidal waters. Yeah, you've been out there. You've covered events on tidal waters. But for somebody that's getting ready to kind of dive into the tournament world and fish tidal waters, what advice could you give to them to overcome their intimidation, their fear, whatever you want to call it, about fishing tidal waters?
Two things I would say. One, do your homework to where you know you're in an area that holds fish. Like, I knew there were fish in a certain section of the Chickahominy. So I could have fished all the James and Chip Oaks and all this crazy stuff. But if I didn't know that there were fish in that area, you go long periods of time without bites, from what I experienced and what people said on tidal rivers, because when it's not right, it's not right. And you can fish through the best stretches and not get bit if you don't know what you're doing. So for me to know that I had started in the Chickahominy in an area where fish have always been caught in every tournament that's been known to man that's gone out of there, I knew I was around fish. The second thing that I would say is give yourself an extra day if you can to practice, because until you've experienced a tide cycle and seen what it's like up and what it's like down, like, it takes a day to wrap your head around. Like, I had an aha moment where I was like, okay, I get it now. I understand it, because it's different when you're covering a tournament because you're back and forth and you're at the weigh-in and stuff. But when you can look at one cypress on high tide and then look at that same cypress on low tide and then look at that same cypress on high tide again, you're like, it clicks as far as just a little bit of understanding of how much difference you're dealing with, what it looks like under the water at high tide, what you're fishing at low. You know what I mean? Like, it just, so I would say go to an area that you know has fish and spend a day in a small area to understand what a cycle looks like, and then kind of expand from there. That really helped kind of just wrap my head around it the first day that I was at the James. All
right, Frank, do you remember your first tidal water tournament?
Yeah, it was the Potomac.
Really?
Yes. And I wound up getting a check out of that place. And what I had found was, I found this grass flat that came out, but it had a tidal ridge on the inside to the bank, and then a drop off on the main riverside. And as the tide would go down, it had created like a sandbar on the back side of it. And it was a very long stretch of a flat. And I noticed that there were several, I call them hard spots, that were on this thing, but what I've come to learn is they were probably shell beds. There were several hard spots on it where the grass would grow up and then there would be no grass there. That was the key to the pattern at that time. And I want to say it was by accident, but I treated it like I would be looking for bass structure fishing stuff, obviously nowhere near as deep as I normally would fish. Yeah. But I understood that I needed to be there when the tide was going out and coming in, is what it amounted to. And it was a long stretch. It was, probably 200-300 yards long. And I would just go down it, and there were key spots where I would get them and nowhere else. And then I would run back up and do it again. And then the tide would ebb and I would dink and dunk around. And then as soon as the tide would start to come back, I did it in reverse. I always work the boat into the current so I can have boat control. So then that's what happened. I mean, in fact, I think I had one of the bigger bags of the last day, the second day.
Yeah. You like the Potomac? Did you like that?
Yeah,
body water?
I do a lot. I would love to fish it now because that was in my infancy on tidal waters. I think I could do major damage there now, knowing what I know. You know. But
very cool. All right, let's do this. There's some random questions on the YouTube comments, so I'm going to get to a couple of them. Look at this one first, Frank. Frank, I'm trying to learn to graph ledges better. Would you please go over what is the best way to graph, aka zigzag over the ledge or go parallel?
Okay, so here's you got to understand 2D sonar. I'm zigzagging over the ledge. So in other words, what's happening is I'm going perpendicular into the ledge from deep to shallow turn the boat around, go from shallow to deep, and I'm doing it in tiny swaths. So I'm getting an idea of what's the ledge is doing that way. The other thing is now with side imaging, okay, you can parallel the ledge. You can get your boat out deeper, side scan the ledge, and you can see what's on that transition, on that break line. So there's two ways to do it. One side scan, one's 2D. They're both effective. I still get stuck on my 2D going up and down, but when I see something funky that happens, I'll turn around and I'll go side scan it to make sure that what I think I see on 2D is what I see, my images on side imaging.
All right, very cool. There you have it. All right, next one. Frank and Matt, which knot do you use when you're flipping? Palomar or Snell or neither one? Frank?
I use the Palomar knot on all my offset hooks, and I'll Snell on a straight shank.
Matt?
Palomar. Just make sure that the lines don't get crossed. You want to have two like that, and then two that hatch over the top, wet it. You don't want to burn it, just as long as you take your time and your lines aren't crossed. As long as your knot looks neat. Like, that's what I found. If it looks at all like it's a little tall or it's not like symmetrical, just cut it off and retie it, because your line's going to be crossed. You'll cut your fluorocarbon. As 100%. Long as it's neat and it looks right. I mean, like, you can't even sit. I mean, everyone's like, make sure your lines aren't crossed. But you could just tell if you look at it. If it looks crisp and neat, you're golden. If not, freaking cut it off and retie.
That's true. 100% accurate. Because what happens a lot of times is when you put your hook back through the loop will twist on you and you won't see it. And you put the hook through, and then you got your lines are twisted. But you'll know immediately if the knot's wrong. Like Matt said, it's visually obvious.
It's not going to cinch down crisp or clean. It's not going to really lock into place. You'll be like, whatever, and it'll be fine. And then I guarantee you won't even feel it on the next hook set. You're going to reel down and it's just your rod. It'll just be like a clean break off.
Yeah.
Do you think sometimes, Frank, people get way too complicated on knots and they don't keep it simple?
Yeah, I do. But, there's so many new knots and so many good knots for a lot of different reasons. I tend to just stick with the Palomar knot. I don't flip too often with a straight shank hook. Yeah. I think when the point comes through the plastic, it starts to snag on everything too much. I like texposing my rig, and the offset worm hooks lend themselves way better to that.
And I'm just the opposite. I flip almost exclusively with the straight shank with the Palomar. I know Brad Hallman, unless he's in grass, he'll flip with the EWG or the offset hook as well. So it's personal preference. Yes, right. I remember we had Greg Hackney on who was talking about the Palomar and the knot and stuff. But I've tied a Palomar for years and years and years. I remember having a conversation with Brandon Polinick when all these crazy knots were coming out. Aaron's back there going, and then you twist it 37 times, and then 11 times back through, and then you swing it around in the air, and then wet it, and then double cinch it. And I was like, I remember Brandon saying once, and this is what stuck with me with the Palomar. He's like, when I start breaking the Palomar, I'll learn a new knot. Until 100%. Then, the whole point with the fishing deal is not to break off. So I'm not breaking off now, so why would I change that? I'm the same way with the uni to uni on my braid to fluorocarbon. When I start pulling on stuff and it breaks off and I come back and I just have the braid tag end or a fish surges and I break it off at the knot, then I'll learn the FG San Diego Jam Flying Lure knot. Until then,
here the FG knot is a thinner knot than the uni to uni. It's a much thinner knot. It goes through your guides with effortless. You don't even hear it go through the guides if it's tied properly. The FG knot was a funky knot at first when I started tying it. Now I can tie it in a second. Just,
like I said, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying for me, I'm not having issues with my guides. I'm not hearing it going through the way I'm doing it. I can tie the thing in 20 seconds. It's what I've got confidence on. I'm not breaking it off. If I start breaking it off, then I'll reevaluate it. But that's the knot for me right now. Right.
And that's fair. I mean, that's fair. Like I said, I don't use a whole lot of knots. The Palomar knot is 99% what I throw.
I'm right there with you, Frank. It's amazing. It's like it's a granny knot with an extra loop over the hook.
Yeah, I mean it's
that's what it is.
But it's simple to tie, it's fast, and it's effective. I mean, it's one of the strongest knots out there. Anytime you're anytime you're cinching line on top of line, the whole key is not to burn it. You know what I mean? That's the whole key.
Yeah. All right, man. We are across the country. Obviously, in some places, they are knee deep in summertime. I know we are here in Oklahoma. Northern might be a little different, might be a little cooler. Do you like fishing during the summer, Frank? And really, what is your favorite tactic, be it largemouth, when that water temp crosses that mark of 80 degrees? What can you tell the fans about that?
Yeah, I love everything about summer fishing because I don't have to go to the bank if I don't want to.
Yeah.
The thing is heat maintenance is the most important thing. A lot of water. I usually will drink 2 or 3 waters and a Gatorade if I have Gatorade with me, mostly water. But you just want to stay hydrated and stay cool. That's the main thing in the summer. But the fishing part of it, I love being offshore, and that's one of the best times to be offshore. And so I'm kind of right at home there. I have caught bass extremely super shallow in the summer that would buck all the odds of what you're supposed to do in the summer. And that's fun too. You know, I learned real quick that grass lakes fish a little differently than structure lakes. And one of my favorite things to do is punch grass. So sometimes in the summer I'll forego the offshore bite to dunk a big weight. It's a fun way to fish. Yeah, it's a real fun way to fish.
Cool stuff. All right, Matt. Anything else? You got anything going on you want to talk about until next week?
I should have next week. I'll have the James Rivers days 1 and 2 out, so you get to see a little bit of Tidal action going down there. It's amazing to me how finicky tidal fish can be and how dumb and aggressive they can be all at the same time.
Yeah.
Like I had never experienced anything like that, to where like when they're biting, they're all biting. And when they're not biting, none of them are biting.
No. And you'll experience some of that too on some of the lakes and some of the reservoirs and river reservoirs that we have that are current generated. Mm-hmm. You'll notice when they run current, the fish get crazy. When they stop running current, they kind of go, "Oh, we're a little done with this idea," you know. So you'll notice that too. You know, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about for people that don't ever fish tides and don't have tides to fish. There's a thing called an estuary effect that's created by the wind. Okay, so here's what happens.
Oh, drawings.
Yeah, it's remedial. It's remedial.
These will be available on Frank's eBay afterwards.
So if the wind is blowing this way, it takes the water. This is the water column. It takes
the Florida deal.
It happens up north too, in bays and estuaries. If you have wind direction, whichever way the wind is blowing, the water stacks in the direction of the wind, and conversely, the water drops in the opposite direction. So what happens is you have this thing. It's called an estuary effect. So the water actually leans whichever way the wind's blowing. So when you're fishing an area like that, if you're on the windy side of things, okay, and let's just say you're fishing top waters, you've got more water over the grass. Those fish can get up there, and it makes a better bite. Now pay attention too, because if the wind shifts direction, that water's going to start to move, and you're going to get false current through there, which also triggers bites. So it's called the estuary effect, and we have that a lot here. So, you know, all throughout the country you have it, especially lakes that are big and wide open and big bays and estuaries where you have volumes of water from bigger lakes coming in it. It's really unique. I mean, it's really cool. I've been in situations where the wind's blowing in and I'm fishing places that otherwise are dry. So it's really kind of cool. It's a cool thing to look for.
That's where when you hear the guys talk and they say, "Oh, I ran there and the wind had blown all the water out of the area."
100%.
And it's more likely from what I've experienced, natural bodies of water.
Yeah, and the bigger the body of water, the more effect it has. Because
So
there's
that's why
much more volume.
Okeechobee, Champlain,
Oh,
stuff
yes.
like that, big giant bodies of water. You hear guys make long runs, and especially down in Florida, you have heard Ish and stuff talk about it. And they're like, there was no water in my area.
Yep.
And you're sitting there going, whoa, what? And it is like a tidal deal, and it blows it all. It literally blows the water out of areas. But that also happens then up north. Then, those big natural with long, big, shallow flats that typically you hose them in. Those fish just have no water left.
Right, and they back out with the water. They back away. You know.
Frank, one more question from the comments on YouTube. Nathan wants to know: ask Frank about how the moon affects the tide.
Well, everybody's going to think I'm crazy, but the moon really doesn't affect the tide. It's the rotation of the Earth around the sun's axis, and it's an oblong rotation. It's not perfectly round. Yeah. It's an oblong rotation. So at certain points in there, you're going to move more water and less water. The moon actually doesn't control it. It's the rotation around the sun that does.
I've been on it for like 45 minutes. If you just Google what causes tides and things like that, you can get as nerdy as you want or as basic as you want. You can find 1,000 article that's like, hey, here it is. And then you can find stuff where there's like, I'm looking at it. Tide generating force equals X mass over distance cubed. Sun's mass over the sun's distance from the Earth cubed. Note the sun is 20. Dude, there's like all these freaking calculations.
That's way too much.
About them like lining up and how that's like a massive tide with like the moon and the sun and the Earth and all that certain rotation.
And the spring crazy. And the spring neap tide. Yeah. Exactly, 100%.
All right, Frank. Great stuff. And this show actually came about due to requests from fans that wanted you to talk about tides.
Yeah, I got an instant message the other day on my Instagram, Scalish_fishing, and the guy was really interested in tides, and it was really a rapid response because I literally got this a day or two ago. Yeah. And we decided, okay, let's do it.
One more thing. I have noticed it does seem in general on tidal fisheries, smaller, more compact baits, more finesse presentations tend to dominate over crazy stuff. Is that a fair assessment? Like a smaller, like a compact jig, a worm, a smaller worm. It seems like those things.
Yeah, traditionally, I'm trying to think back in my arsenals, and I don't really throw big Mugambo size baits. I don't. I throw more compact jigs anyway, unless I'm really, doing some magnum flipping and football jigging. But yeah, that seems accurate. In the beginning of my bass fishing career, everybody threw little 4-inch ringworms on the Potomac all the time. No, I wasn't seeing anybody throwing 10-inch worms and stuff.
Huh.
Doesn't mean they won't work. It's just traditional.
Hey, you know what, Frank? I wasn't on a tidal fishery yesterday, but the big stuff didn't work.
Neither did the orange cone.
No, merge left, merge right. Yeah, that's absolutely.
What
all right, man.
What were you throwing on the ski rig?
On a what?
What were you throwing on the Carolina rig?
Oh, BFE.
Oh, you can't throw the BFE under the bus like that.
Hey, it's not the baits.
Yeah.
It's not. And an old school, some people may know this, an old school ring fry and an old school
dude, stick
French fry.
Stick with your creature baits on that Carolina rig. Come on.
Once again, man, fishing history. I lit them up on that ring fry in June one summer. So, fishing history, man. It is what it is. All right, Frank, I got to know, next week we'll be back next Thursday, but next weekend, getting ready for the 4th of July weekend. What's a typical 4th of July weekend for Frank Scalish?
No fishing. The lakes around here are ludicrous.
Yeah.
They're too small, too many people. I don't even look at the water then. I might go walleye fishing. I don't know.
Yeah. You get the grill out. Do you cook brats? What do you do, man?
Yeah, we go to my sister-in-law's house and party like rock stars.
Oh,
You know,
Uncle Vinny's there. Uncle Vinny, good to see you. How's business?
Jeez. All right.
yeah.
Well,
I mean, nothing crazy. Really, honestly, nothing crazy. I don't even like going. I don't even like going anywhere on the 4th of July. I'd
I'm
rather
with you,
just
man.
stay home.
I'm with you. I get it. So we will be back next week. And Frank's going to make a special appearance on Monday. Big announcement on Monday. It's definitely going to happen. So very excited about what he has going on that he's going to announce on Monday. And then make sure you check out basszone.com for the schedule next week and see when Matt and I will be doing an evening show. We'll be on the water in the morning, and then we're going to come back and do an evening show next week. That's kind of the plan. So check it out on Sunday. And then once again, great appreciation for surpassing the 10,000 subscriber mark on YouTube. That's great stuff. And keep it coming. Last thing, real quick, Matt. People want to know, when is the merch shop going to be open?
That's a good question. I thought it was going to be open next week, in the next couple weeks.
Can you work on that today, maybe? Can you make a phone call or two?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, people want to know when the merch shops open up, so maybe we can tell them on Monday. All right?
Can we not do the show live from the lake? Do you have that capability?
I don't know. No,
phone?
because the cell signal sucks where we're going to be. It's not good. We could try, but we could still plan on doing the PM show. All right, we'll see. I don't know. The cell signal last time I was down there was horrible. So we'll see.
Fair enough.
We'll see what we can do. All right, Frank, great stuff. Once again, I know all the fans out there greatly appreciate it. And we will talk to you on Monday, man.
Monday.
All right, good stuff. That's it, folks. We're out of here.